Picture this. You're standing in your kitchen and you say your dog's name. The head comes up. You say, "Do you want to go for a," and you don't even finish the word because the dog has already exploded off the floor and is spinning in circles by the door. Later that evening, you're on the phone talking about your day and you mention the word vet. From across the room, a head lifts. Ears go back. And a dog that was fast asleep 30 seconds ago is now suddenly deeply suspicious of you. This is such a universal experience that entire households develop code words for it. People spell out WALK, they switch to a different language. They invent euphemisms for bath and vet and nail clippers, and then, inevitably, a few weeks later, the dog cracks the code too, and they have to invent new ones. Cat owners do the same dance with carrier and pill. At some point, almost every pet owner has had the slightly unsettling thought, how much of this is it actually getting? So, what is actually happening in there? Is your dog understanding your words the way another person would, or is it just reacting to your tone, your body language, the jingle of keys in your pocket, and 100 tiny cues you don't even know you're giving? This question sounds simple, and it is one of the most surprisingly deep rabbit holes in all of animal science. Because the answer involves brain scanners, a border collie who knew over 1,000 words, a horse who fooled all of Europe, and a finding so strange it changed what scientists think language even is. And by the end of this, you'll realize the real answer is stranger and more flattering to your pet than a simple yes or no. Let's get into it. Let's start with the skeptic in the room, because there is a genuinely famous cautionary tale here, and every scientist who studies this has it burned into their brain. In the early 1900s in Germany, there was a horse named Clever Hans. And Clever Hans could do arithmetic. Ask him what 4 plus 5 was, and he would tap his hoof 9 times and stop. He could do fractions. He could tell time. He could spell out answers by tapping through the alphabet. Crowds gathered. Newspapers went wild. A horse, it seemed, could understand German and do math. A commission of experts investigated and concluded the trainer wasn't cheating. But then, a psychologist named Oscar Pfungst ran a cleverer test. He asked the questions when nobody in the room knew the answer. And suddenly, Clever Hans couldn't do math at all. Here's what was really happening. As Hans tapped toward the correct number, the humans watching would unconsciously tense up in anticipation. Then, at the right count, they'd relax a tiny shift in posture, a barely perceptible change in breathing or facial expression. And Hans, who could not do arithmetic, was reading those minute human signals and knowing exactly when to stop tapping, which is honestly more impressive than doing math. Hans wasn't a genius mathematician. He was a genius at reading people. And ever since, this has been called the Clever Hans effect, and it's the reason scientists are extremely careful when testing whether an animal really understands language or whether it's just reading us. So keep Hans in the back of your mind, because he is going to turn out to be the key to this entire story. But first, let's look at what happens when researchers do control for all of that and put a dog inside a brain scanner. This is where it gets remarkable. In 2016, a team at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, led by a researcher named Attila Andics, published a study in the journal Science that genuinely startled a lot of people. Their setup was ingenious. They trained 13 dogs, border collies, golden retrievers, a German shepherd, a Chinese crested, to lie perfectly still, unrestrained, inside an fMRI brain scanner. That alone took months, and it's worth appreciating these dogs volunteered, walked in, lay down, and let scientists watch their brains work. Then the trainers spoke to them through headphones using 4 different combinations. A praise word like "well done" said in an excited, praising tone. The same praise word said in a flat, neutral tone. A meaningless filler word like "yet" or "however" said in an excited tone. And that same meaningless word in a flat tone. So the researchers had separated the two things completely, what was said and how it was said. And here's what the scans showed. Regardless of the tone of voice, the dog's brains processed the meaningful words in the left hemisphere. The meaningless filler words didn't get that response. Meanwhile, the intonation, the emotional tone, was processed separately in the right hemisphere. If that division sounds familiar, it should, because it's essentially the same split that happens in your brain. In humans, the left hemisphere generally handles word meaning, and the right handles intonation. Dogs were doing the same fundamental thing, separately analyzing what we say and how we say it. But the single most beautiful finding came from a third place in the brain, the reward center, the region that lights up for food and petting and good things. And that reward center only fully lit up in one specific condition. Not when the dog heard praise words in a flat voice. Not when it heard meaningless words in a happy voice. Only when the praise words and the praising tone came together. Sit with that for a second, because it's genuinely lovely. It means the dog was doing something more than reacting to a happy noise. It was integrating both channels, checking whether the words and the tone agreed with each other, and only then registering it as real praise. Which means that when you tell your dog "good boy" in a bored monotone while scrolling your phone, some part of that dog knows the message didn't fully add up. So, dogs really are processing words as words. That's not projection, that's brain activity. But how many words? And how deeply do they actually understand them? This is where we meet the superstars, and they will genuinely raise your expectations of what a dog can do. The first is a border collie named Rico, studied by researchers in 2004. Rico knew the names of over 200 objects. He could hear a word and go fetch the right toy from another room. Impressive, but here's the part that made scientists sit up. The researchers put a brand new toy Rico had never seen among familiar ones, and asked for it using a brand new word he'd never heard. And Rico went and got the new toy. He reasoned it out. I know all these other words. This new word must belong to the thing I don't have a word for yet. That process is called fast mapping, and it's a strategy human toddlers use when learning language. It was thought to be uniquely human. A dog was doing it. And then there was Chaser. Chaser was a border collie trained over years by a retired psychology professor named John Pilley, and Chaser learned the names of over 1,000 objects. 1,000. She could reliably fetch a specific toy by name from a pile of hundreds. She could sort them into categories. She could follow a 3-element instruction, take a specific object to a specific place, which means she was responding to something like the structure of a sentence, not just a single keyword. That last ability is worth dwelling on. Pilley could tell Chaser to take a particular toy to a particular place, and she'd do it correctly. That means she wasn't just triggering on one magic word. She was holding multiple pieces of information at once and combining them into a single action. That's not a trick. That's parsing. And the sheer scale of 1,000 words deserves a moment too. Think about what it takes to memorize 1,000 arbitrary sound patterns in a language you cannot speak, produced by a completely different species, and to keep them straight well enough to pick the right item out of a pile of hundreds of nearly identical stuffed toys. Most humans learning a foreign language would struggle to reliably retrieve 1,000 nouns on command. Chaser did it in a language she could not pronounce a single word of. Now, most dogs are not Chaser, and it's worth being honest about that. Chaser was a gifted individual of a highly word-oriented breed trained intensively for years by a psychologist. The often cited estimate for a typical pet dog is somewhere around 165 words, which is still, when you think about it, an extraordinary number of arbitrary human noises for a completely different species to have memorized. But there's a deeper question hiding here, and researchers have poked at it in a fascinating way. When your dog hears a word, is it recognizing a label for a thing the way you do? Or is it just recognizing a sound pattern that means go do the fetch behavior? A team led by the neuroscientist Gregory Burns tried to get at this. They trained dogs on 2 object names, then scanned their brains while playing those trained words mixed with made-up nonsense words the dogs had never heard, and they found something unexpected. The dogs' brains showed a bigger response to the nonsense words than to the trained ones. That's a novelty response. The brain flagging that's new, that's unfamiliar, pay attention. Which tells us something crucial. The dogs were absolutely distinguishing between real trained words and gibberish. They had a category for words they know. But it also hints that dogs may process language differently from us, with less of the automatic, effortless meaning extraction humans do, and more of a trained recognition plus novelty detection system. So we've got dogs. But there's an animal in the room that a lot of people assume is a lost cause here, and that assumption turns out to be completely wrong. Cats. The standard joke is that cats hear us perfectly well and simply choose not to care, and honestly, behaviorally, that's often what it looks like. But in 2019, researchers in Japan, led by Atsuko Saito, ran a clean experiment on this. They played cats a series of 4 nouns of similar length and cadence, one after another, until the cats got bored and stopped reacting, a technique called habituation. Then, as the 5th word, they played the cat's own name, and the cats reacted. Ear twitches, head turns, a renewed response after they'd tuned out the other words. The cats could distinguish their own name from other similar-sounding words. Now, here's the honest scientific caveat, and it's an important one. This doesn't prove a cat understands its name, as a name as a label for itself in the way you understand yours. What it more likely means is that the cat has learned that this particular sound pattern is meaningfully associated with things that happen to it, food attention being picked up. But even that is real discrimination of a human word from other human words. Your cat is listening. It has simply chosen in the grand feline tradition to make its response entirely optional. And this points at something important about studying cats in general. A huge amount of research has been done on dogs and comparatively little on cats, partly because dogs are eager cooperative test subjects, and cats are, to put it politely, not. A dog will happily do a task 50 times for a treat. A cat will do it twice, decide it has learned everything worth learning about your experiment, and leave. That difference in temperament has probably caused us to badly underestimate cats for decades. The gap in the research may say less about feline intelligence than about feline willingness to participate in it. And if we widen the lens beyond cats and dogs, the picture gets even more startling because there are animals that didn't just recognize words, they talked back. The most famous is a gray parrot named Alex who worked for 30 years with the researcher Irene Pepperberg. And Alex was not doing parroting in the dismissive sense of the word. Alex could identify around 50 different objects, recognize colors and shapes, and understand concepts like bigger, smaller, same, and different. Shown a tray of objects, he could answer questions like, how many are green, which requires holding two categories in mind at once and combining them. He also apparently understood the concept of zero or something functionally close to it. Asked what color a set of objects was when there were none of the type he'd been asked about, he'd answer none. He invented that usage himself. He got bored and frustrated during testing sessions and would tell the researchers want to go back, meaning back to his cage. On the night before he died, the last thing he reportedly said to Pepperberg was the phrase they said to each other every night, "You be good, I love you." Now, scientists are careful here, and rightly so. Nobody claims Alex understood love the way you do. But the label learning the categories, the ability to answer novel questions about combinations he hadn't been drilled on that was tested rigorously for decades, and it held up. Then there's Kanzi, a bonobo studied by the researcher Sue Savage Rumbaugh. Kanzi communicated using a board of abstract symbols, and remarkably, he learned it by accident, watching researchers try and fail to teach his adoptive mother. Nobody was training him. He was just paying attention. What makes Kanzi genuinely important for our question is that he demonstrated comprehension of spoken English sentences he'd never heard before, including ones with structure that mattered. Researchers gave him novel instructions like put the soap on the apple and put the apple in the water requests that were deliberately strange so he couldn't guess from habit or context. And he performed impressively well, including on sentences where word order changed the meaning. That's a step beyond anything we've seen so far. Not just knowing labels, but tracking who is doing what to whom. Now, before this gets oversold, this remains one of the most fiercely debated areas in all of animal science. Critics point out these are exceptional individuals, raised in extraordinary circumstances, and that the clever Hans problem is very hard to fully eliminate when the researcher who tests the animal is also the one who raised it. That's a fair critique, and honest scientists in this field say so themselves. But even the skeptics generally accept that something real is happening. The debate is about how deep it goes, not whether it exists. And there's a much newer chapter to this one you've probably seen on your phone, the dogs with the soundboards. Those grids of buttons on the floor that a dog presses to produce words like outside play, food, and in the videos that go viral, unnervingly poignant combinations like love you or mad. There's actual science being done here, including a large research project led by Federico Rossano at the University of California, San Diego, studying thousands of these button-using pets. I want to be genuinely careful with this one because it's the most emotionally seductive material in this entire topic, and it is very much still being worked out. Early findings suggest that at least some dogs press buttons in ways that aren't random and aren't simply mirroring what the owner just did, which is the first thing you'd suspect. But whether a dog pressing love you has any concept resembling what those words mean to you is a completely open question, and honestly probably not in the way the videos imply. It's an area to watch with curiosity, not to draw conclusions from yet. Now let's step back and answer the big question honestly because we have enough to do it properly. Do pets understand what we're saying? The honest answer is not the way another human does. And that's not a disappointment, it's the setup for something better. Here's what our pets are almost certainly not doing. They're not parsing grammar. When you say, I took the dog to the park yesterday versus the dog took me to the park yesterday, those sentences mean opposite things to you, and that difference lives in the grammar in word order. There's no good evidence that dogs decode that. They're also not handling abstraction, the words that don't attach to a thing or an action. Try explaining next Tuesday, or expensive, or disappointed to a dog. Those words have nothing for a dog to grab onto, and they're almost certainly not following the overall narrative of your sentences. When you tell your dog about your terrible day at work, it is not tracking the plot, which honestly is worth being at peace with. Because here's the thing, the dog listening to you complain about your terrible day is still getting the most important part of the message. It knows you're upset. It knows the upset isn't aimed at it. And it knows that lying against your leg tends to help. It missed every word and understood the entire situation. So, what are they doing? They're doing something else, something that in its own way is more impressive. They're running a multi-channel analysis of you, and the words are only one channel. Channel 1 is the words themselves, the sounds they've learned matter, and we've seen that's real and measurable in the brain. Channel 2 is intonation, and this one is huge. That right hemisphere emotional processing is doing enormous work. Your pet is reading pitch, volume, rhythm, tension in your voice. It knows the difference between your happy voice, your worried voice, your angry voice, and your I'm about to give a bath voice, often before you're consciously aware you've changed your tone. Channel 3 is your body. And here is where the ghost of clever Hans comes roaring back. Dogs are extraordinarily good at reading human body language, arguably better at some of it than we are with each other. They read the direction of your gaze. They follow pointing gestures spontaneously, which their wolf relatives largely don't. They read your posture, the tightness of your shoulders, whether you're turning toward them or away. They notice which drawer you're opening, which shoes you're putting on, which way your feet are pointing. That pointing detail deserves a pause, because it's more significant than it sounds. If you point at something for a chimpanzee, one of our closest relatives, an animal vastly more intelligent than a dog, by most measures, it often doesn't get it. It looks at your finger. But a dog puppy with almost no training will look where you're pointing. It understands that your gesture is about something else that you are trying to communicate. That specific skill, reading a human's communicative intent, appears to be something dogs are extraordinarily tuned for, in a way that even our brilliant primate cousins are not. Think about what that means for your kitchen scenario. Before you finish the word, your dog has already registered that your body turned a few degrees toward the hallway. That's not a lesser form of understanding. That's a form of understanding you don't even know you're broadcasting. Channel 4 is context and routine. Your pet has built a detailed statistical model of your life. It knows that this sequence of noises at this time of day, near this door, wearing these shoes, historically leads to a walk. It's running prediction from patterns. And Channel 5 is smell, at least for dogs, and it's a channel we can barely imagine. Your emotional state changes, your body chemistry, and dogs can detect those changes. Your dog may quite literally smell your stress before you've said a word about it. Now put all 5 channels together, and here's the reframe that changes everything. Your pet is not trying to understand English. Your pet is trying to understand you. And English is just one of the 5 instruments in the orchestra it's listening to. That's why the Clever Hans story matters so much. For a century, it's been told as a cautionary tale about gullible humans and an animal that was only reading body language. But flip it around. Clever Hans could detect changes in human posture and expression so subtle that a room full of trained experts couldn't see them happening in themselves. That's not a failure. That's a superpower. And every dog and cat in every home is running a version of it all day on you. Which brings us to the twist, and it's the part that genuinely reframes the whole question. We started by asking whether animals can understand our language, but the science quietly turned that question around and pointed it at us. Remember the Budapest study, the one that found dogs use a left hemisphere for words, right hemisphere for tone division, just like ours? The obvious assumption before that study was that this brain architecture evolved in humans because we evolved language. It was our special equipment for our special ability. But dogs have it too. And dogs did not evolve language, which means this neural machinery, the ability to separate what is said from how it is said, almost certainly existed long before human language did. It wasn't built for language. Language was built on top of it. Attila Andics put it in a way that has stuck with me. He said that what makes words uniquely human is not a special neural capacity, but our invention of using them. Read that again because it's a genuinely startling idea. The hardware wasn't the breakthrough. The hardware was already there, sitting in the brains of our shared ancestors, in the brains of dogs doing other jobs. Our species' great leap wasn't growing a new language organ. It was taking equipment that already existed and inventing something to do with it. That reframes your dog completely. When your dog processes your words in its left hemisphere, it isn't performing a cheap imitation of human language. It's using ancient equipment that both of you inherited from a common ancestor tens of millions of years ago. You and your dog are running related software. You just built a wildly elaborate application on top of yours. And it reframes us too. We tend to think of language as the thing that separates humans from every other animal, the bright line, the proof of our uniqueness. But if the underlying machinery was already there in dogs and creatures that never invented a single word, then the line gets blurrier and far more interesting. We aren't special because we have a language organ nobody else has. We're special because we did something with the equipment. The miracle wasn't the hardware. The miracle was the idea. And there's one more layer, which is that dogs specifically got a massive head start on understanding us. Over 15 to 40,000 years of domestication, the dogs that could read human signals follow a pointed finger track. A gaze respond to a call, were the dogs that got fed, protected, and bred. We spent tens of thousands of years unintentionally selecting for animals that could understand us. Dogs are, in a real sense, the product of a very long project to build a species that pays attention to human communication. Of course they're good at this. We made them good at this, and they made themselves good at it because it worked. And notice that the traffic ran both ways. We didn't just shape them into listeners. We changed how we talk. Listen to how people speak to dogs, and you'll hear something specific. A higher pitch, exaggerated melody. Simple repeated phrases, drawn-out vowels. Researchers call it dog-directed speech, and it is remarkably similar to the way adults instinctively talk to babies. Nobody teaches you to do this. You just do it automatically the moment a dog enters the room, and you probably do it in a voice you would be embarrassed to use in front of colleagues. And here's the interesting part. Research suggests dogs actually respond better to it. That exaggerated pitch and rhythm makes the important words stand out, essentially highlighting them. So over thousands of years, we didn't just build an animal that listens carefully to human speech. We also developed a special dialect of human speech aimed at that animal. Two species quietly meeting in the middle, each adjusting toward the other, until a person and a dog could stand in a room and reliably get a message across. So let's come back to your kitchen. You say a word and a head comes up. What's happening in that moment is not a dog understanding English. It's something more interesting. There's a brain in there that heard a specific sound pattern and flagged it in the left hemisphere as a word that matters. Another region checked the emotional tone of your voice and compared the two for agreement. Meanwhile, it clocked your posture, your gaze, the fact that you turned toward the door, the time of day, the shoes, and possibly the chemical signature of your mood. And it fused all of that into a single confident prediction. That's not a lesser version of understanding language. That's a different, and in some ways, broader kind of listening. Your pet may not know what your words mean, but it has been studying you closely and continuously for its entire life. It knows your patterns better than most people in your life do. It can often tell what kind of day you've had before you've taken off your coat. So do pets really understand what we're saying? Not the sentences, not the grammar, not the plot of your bad day at work. But they understand something real in the words themselves, and they understand a great deal more than the words. They have been reading you in 5 channels at once since the day they met you. We taught them a handful of our words. They learned to read our entire body. And somewhere in that lopsided trade, 2 completely different species figured out how to understand each other well enough that you can stand in a kitchen, say 1 syllable, and be perfectly joyfully understood. And maybe that's the thing worth sitting with. We tend to measure other minds by how closely they resemble ours, as if understanding only counts when it arrives in sentences. But there is another creature in your home that has spent every day of its life studying one specific human, learning your voice, your face, your habits, your smell, the particular sound of your car, the difference between your tired footsteps and your happy ones. It cannot follow your sentences. It has been reading you far more closely than most people ever have. Say the word. Watch the head come up. Now you know what's really happening in there.